Bienvenue, welcome, bem-vindas, benvenuti a tutti. I'm Livia Labati. During today's sessions, our panel is going to be discussing translating Anne Lister. As a worldwide audience of people become more aware of Anne Lister and want to learn more about her, it is only natural that a large contingent will not have English as their first language. Only about 6% of the worldwide population has English as their native language. So how does one go and access in-language information about her? Also, as you well know, Anne Lister was interested in languages herself and really strived to learn and use them in her day-to-day, especially in her travels, and to access books and resources that interested her, as evidenced by her journals and her extensive and varied book collection. Not to mention her own personal language quirks. So this means that making her body of work available in language is a complex translation and interpretation undertaking. So we have 3 guests today who have taken this challenge on. So welcome Juliette Ulmann, Lucia Falzari, and Chris Santos. We'll break the session to 3 parts. First, our panelists will give you a brief summary of the work that they've done and how translation fits into it. And then we'll have a brief discussion and open for questions. So please add your questions as they come up for you in the chat, preceded by a queue so we can find them easily. And next we'll hear from Lucia, then Chris, and then Juliette. So take it away, Lucia.
So, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. And I want to make a little forward. I am here to speak about translating Anne Lister, but this is just a part of the whole project. I am very proud and honored to be running together with Francesca Raya and Irene Trotta, who are 2 amazing code breakers, by the way. And yes, we've been running this project since over a year now. And it turned out being a website and an Instagram account, also as well as a Twitter. We wanted to create this entity because we wanted to introduce the Italian audience to the real Anne Lister and to help the Italians, generally speaking, but also those who are not familiar, also and especially those who are not familiar with English, to connect with Anne Lister, her world, to become familiar with all her world. So we said, how can we do it? We are pursuing this in 2 ways. One way is translating parts of Anne Lister's journals, of course, and other documents, as well as other news and documents like the Birmingham's article and other papers. And the other way we are pursuing this is by carrying on researches. We are researching, well, Anne Lister's Italy-related acquaintances and interests. So basically, the people who she knew, she had met, and who sooner or later had something to do with Italy, and Anne's Italian interest in literature and so forth. So this is generally the introduction to the project. Now this is maybe the first big hit we did with the translation, dealing with translation, and that is in March 2021. Gentleman Jack was released in Italy as well, and we decided to take the opportunity to help people in knowing the real Anne Lister beyond the TV character. So we, in a record time, really, we wrote this episode by episode guide to the show by just creating this parallel from what was going on the screen and the real journal, the actual quotes from journals. And this was all written in Italian. and the quotes from the journals were translated. Even the longest one we translated, we decided to take them as a whole. And we also decided that each quote had to be linked to the actual journal pages on the archives website, on the West Yorkshire Archives site, because it was our purpose was to create more of a connection to the fact that Anne was a real person. So this was how we carried this project on. And we released it every evening that the show aired. We went on in the same days, and that was it. Then, but that was in March, and then we said, what next? Meanwhile, Irene had fully joined the team, and we all decided that we wanted to have a look to Anne Lister's Italian journey, because there's this going to Italy thing. I mean, Anne came to Italy in 1827 with Maria Barlow and Jane Barlow, Maria's daughter. And we decided to create a day-by-day of the journey, to follow them in the actual days. So starting from July the 12th, we started posting daily on Instagram, and also on the website. So it can still be tracked both on the website and on our Instagram account. And of course, at the end of this whole project, we also created the travel map of the whole journey, Italian journey. Now this is interesting. The previous slide was interesting just to show what we did, because it was something not only for the Italian audience. We wanted really to join people on Anne. So we decided to put the transcription and the Italian translations also together with the Anne's handwriting samples, so that anyone could see how she wrote and some highlights of the day. The following one was the following slide was showing. Yeah, this is how the travel map looks like. This one is particularly for the Verona, for the day they arrived in Verona. And you see, we decided to, even here, we didn't add anything. We just translated the journals without any comments or explanation. So there was first the English transcription and then the Italian translation. And in this this very slide is this curious thing, because we also, as I said, we are also researching documents tracking and in Italy. So this was found by Francesca in the Foglio di Verona, and it was the note where the foreigners who arrived in town, and Anne Lister was written as Madame Lister Anna e Famiglia, so Anne Lister and her family. So Jane was probably mistaken for Anne's daughter, and under her name there is Mrs. Barlow. Francesca suggested that maybe Anne was speaking Italian, and that's the reason why Jane was signed as a daughter, because when they left Verona, it was correct. So basically, this is what we have done to now, up to today, and we are still working, of course, on other projects, both on translation and researching. And another thing we want to do is of our researchers, Of course, our native language is Italian, but we want to share them with an international audience. So we also did the other way around in some cases, like when we found some documents related to an worker's brother's death. We translated it into English, so just to create this bridge, this open bridge about Anne. So this is what we do.
Thank you so much, Lucia. So Chris is not here yet, so we're gonna transition to Juliette next.
Yes, okay, thank you. Well, hi, so I'm Juliette, I'm 23, and I just graduated from a master's degree in English with a focus on translation, and the title of my thesis appears here. So my Anne Lister project was my master's thesis. I decided to translate excerpts from the first volume of Elena Whitbread's book, The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister. And I'm very happy to be on the panel because last year, as I was working on said thesis, I was stoked when I found the videos from the previous summit, and they really helped me. So it's really cool to be a part of it now. And well, I've mostly translated literature, and well, I'm just starting out as an independent translator, and I really hope that I get to translate both of Helena Whitbread's books in French and get to have them published in France. I think that since Anne Lister was so keen on France, maybe 21st century French people could be interested in her. So far, they only know her as a mountaineer, and I think it would be good to spread the word about the rest of her life. So yeah, it would be my honor to participate in spreading her diaries and her life story. So yeah, and right here we have an excerpt of a translation that I did. I don't know if I should go ahead and explain more of it. I guess I chose this sentence because it's pretty representative of part of Anne Lister's diaries, which is it's a lot of talking about her emotions and complaining about Tib and saying that she loves her and doesn't care about her. So I thought it was a good representation of their relationship. And yeah, maybe I'll read both. I'll read the translation because you can read English. So it says, bien que j'ai souvent pensé que le départ de Tib ne m'affecterait pas, j'ai senti cet après-midi mon cœur se serrer à l'idée de son départ imminent et de ma solitude prochaine, sans personne à aimer, vers qui me tourner ou à qui parler. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, we're gonna go ahead and transition to discussion, and we'll find another opportunity for Chris to be able to showcase some of her work. Thank you so much for walking through the work that you've done. So to get us started for a conversation, can you speak a little bit if you think it's important for people to be able to read Anne Lister's work in their own language, and if so, why?
Well, okay, I'll start. Of course, I think it's fundamental to get to read the actual journals, because nothing, not even the best translation, can convey the whole of an original work. But that's always the case, especially with Anne. I was discussing the other day that I'm not a code breaker, so I feel it as my fault, but I've been going backwards from the transcript while I was translating. I felt the need to go and see the actual pages, how she actually wrote certain things, and how she, if and when she abbreviated words, how she did it, just to get more connected with the actual journals. So I think that if I felt like this while working on it, I think it would be really important for people to be able to read the original. But in our case, our work also came from the fact, from the awareness that Italians are still not so keen on foreign languages, including English. So at least we thought there should be a first introduction step to that. But it's anyway fundamental to get to the source always.
So as we think about, go ahead, Juliette.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think, of course, it's ideal if you can read it in English, but I think we tend to see translation as a version of a text that is less than. We focus on what's lost in translation. And there are some, I don't know, translation theorists, I would say, who argue that translation adds something to a text. And I think it's a nice way to see it, that it's from a practical standpoint, of course, we translate because we want many people to be able to access the diaries. But yeah, there's something about a translated text that is, it's different from the original, but it's not necessarily less than.
That's a great point. And I think there are some choices that you're making as you're making that adaptation and making the in-language version of the original text that is challenged by the original text. So one of the things we talked about is, and it has some very unique language choices and sometimes expressions or terms that she made up because she didn't have one for certain things, like some sexual practices and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about what challenges you've encountered and how you address them?
Yeah. Well, I think if I want to give an example, mostly, I guess, when you talk about her specific words, they relate to sex very often. Well, not only, but often. And one of the words that I had to translate was kiss, obviously. And in French, literally a kiss is un bisou, or more formally un baiser. But I couldn't use that word because the verb, well, there's the noun un baiser also exists as a verb, baiser, which is slang that means to fuck. So it's not at all evasive. And so to French people, using the literal translation of the word kiss would not work, because the point of using kiss for Anne Lister is that it's a euphemism. So I had to find a way around that. And yeah, I think it's just a nice practical example of what translation is.
That's great. Lucia, do you have any specific ones that come to mind?
Now, I was just thinking that being so Anne's vocabulary is so rich, and she knew the use of language very well. One thing I've learned in these years is to trust her and her choice of words. So I just let her lead the thing without going too much around looking for other words, because most of the times she was so sharp and so precise that I could only rely upon her choice. One thing that really influenced me in this case was the fact that we are going online. So our translations are mainly done to go online. So I was just a little bit afraid that if we were going to explicit, we could fall into the filters like algorithms or so. I really had no knowledge. I wasn't nerd enough to know that. So I just decided to keep it not softer, but having two options in Italian of the same word for the same meaning. I went for the lighter one because the whole context was already clear, and but were it a book, I would have no problem.
Yeah, that's such an interesting example of what Juliette was just expressing about, like the new version has something added to it, and you're adding an understanding of the circumstances in which you're going to consume that content and taking that into account in your translation effort. That's fascinating. Juliette, I think you had talked about an example translation. There was a term about skin or something like that that was really challenging.
Yes. Well, we were talking about expressions of Mr. that maybe were outdated or had changed meaning with time. And I stumbled upon an expression. It was an object in ass's skin. And I don't know what happened to me, but I saw the word ass, and I was like, it's not possible that it means what I think it means. So I was really lost, and I ended up asking my thesis advisor for his opinion, and it was just donkey skin. It was just leather, but specifically donkey skin. But ass is, I think, an old word to mean donkey. I think maybe it's still in use, but I didn't know that it was. So it was my own fault, and I didn't do the research properly. So it was a funny way to. It was humbling. It was a humbling experience because I thought I was doing okay with the translation, and then I missed this huge thing. So yes, that was the ass's skin moment.
That's hilarious. So given that, like, sometimes we're surprised by these things, what were some resources that helped you during your work? If you want to start, Juliette, you can go first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for most translations, I just use dictionaries online, mostly, not really physical dictionaries. I also found a great resource in the Pact with Potential websites, especially for vocabulary relating to sex, though I did not end up translating a lot of words relating to sex, because it's in the second volume, there's a lot of sex, but not in the first volume. And so that was a big resource for understanding just expressions and things that are not set in stone that Anne Lister invented. And other things that I used, well, my thesis advisor had great advice for me. I think, I think that's about it.
That's great. Lucia.
Yeah, the same for me. I also owe so much to the Pact with Potential resources, really. And for the rest, I just relied on my knowledge of English and vocabularies. Also researched online, of course, but basically it was. It's not that complicated to translating, and it's not for me. It wasn't that hard, but I reached the point when I started translating that I had already known her for a couple of years, so I was so familiar with her that I had already it was already my habit to read her and understand how to put
yeah, that's great. Chris is here. Bem-vinda. She
Yeah.
had to go somewhere else because it was out of power. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, it was crazy because it was raining. I had to come to my aunt's house because she has internet here, so I had to drive here. Like,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you
it
for
was
doing
crazy,
that.
but I'm here.
Awesome. So we're continuing our conversation. So please jump in at any time. We were talking about the challenges of translating certain terms to our respective languages. Did you have any examples or particularly challenging ones that you wanted to call out?
Oh yes, and we were having a little chat about that in that day, and I think the hardest part is the money. I think the money, because I am translating the comparing names from In Search of and Walker, and I had a lot of difficulties because of the money. I don't know much about money in England, and then I had to deal with the money of England and French money, and then it was all old systems. So to translate it to Portuguese, it's really hard, but it's fun because I'm discovering new things about that. And maybe I shall try to discover a lot about our money here in Brazil because of that. I mean, the nice thing about translator and enlisted and in Walker's diaries is the fact that the more you discover, the more you want to know more about a lot of things that even from my country, because I already saw people saying that they want to see if some people from Brazil met and Lister, for example, because it was happening a lot of things, and there was family from Lady Stewart, for example, that went to Brazil, like Charles Stewart went to Brazil. And they want to know if they met and listen. I was like, I don't know if they did, but it would be cool if they did, or if they have any relationships or things like that. That would be really cool. But
Yeah.
about that, I think the money was the hardest thing, and the measure of temperature and the system of measurement is the hardest part, I think. And also the terms for sex is really hard because, for example, I told you about the dinky thing, and I still don't have a nice translation for that in Portuguese because we use a lot of diminutive things about that. But yes, I think that it's fun, and I think that the more I have contact with you, I will be having nice terms to use with time.
Yeah, I love these examples because I think it speaks to another aspect of doing any of the translation work, which is there's some domain knowledge that you may not have that has nothing to do with the translation, but then you start like just going into this side quest to learn more about that domain, whether it's wills or money or whatever it is, so that you can then come back and do the translation work, which is super interesting. That's great. So one of the things you had called out, Lucia, is that all of us here, the languages that we're working with are Romance languages. So can you speak a little bit about your impression of like that, how that may affect how we are seeing these language and translation projects?
Yes, well, we as an Italian, I really felt it because Anne really used Latin a lot. She studied and she knew about Latin. She studied the classics, and that was really a solid ground for her education. And I think it also, well, it's obvious in the journals how she used Latin, sometimes more for herself. She used languages in many precise ways, like when she used Latin, she was like for raising her self-confidence sometimes, maybe, or anyway, to remind herself of some quotes that she might have read somewhere, which hit her mind, and so I found it very interesting, because while I was translating and trying to enter in her linguistic world, she was coming towards me. That's what I felt. So I would just find I was writing Latin, and I would read Latin like not noticing it, and after a while I said, "Oh, but it's Latin."
And
I had to switch to Latin, which I still remember from high school, which was a couple of years ago.
And it's so much closer to Italian. Juliette, was that the same relationship you had to her Latin, or different?
I didn't feel the same way at all. I was really impressed with Anne Lister's knowledge of Latin and ancient Greek. But to me, it felt very foreign, because I'm not nearly as good at her as her. And yeah, it wasn't helpful to me at all. It almost felt like, reading a very difficult, it just felt difficult. That's it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, before we transition to questions from the group here, a little bit about responsibility of translation in terms of accuracy and interpretation. Lucia, you gave some examples of presenting transcriptions side by side in the Italian translation next to it, so that people had both things. Can you speak a little bit about like your intent there? And maybe Juliette or Chris can follow up.
Well, translating is, I read somewhere some time ago that translation is a political act, meaning you have on one side the mere translation work, which is the work on the words or the terms, and on that side, I already said I learned how to trust Anne and to follow her. And on the other side, you always have to consider the context, and the context where Anne was writing. So I'd say it would be unfair to read under the same lens the Anne in 1824 as I would read Anne in 1836 or even later, because she evolved like we all do. And so I always have to keep it in mind that in a very short time, for me, I'm reading all of her life. So this is something I must consider. It's her context, and this is one side. And then what I have to consider, what we all have to consider, is that we have another context where we are delivering this translation. So there can be many different contexts, culturally speaking, many reasons why you're doing this work of translation. So it's always a work of balance, trying to keep the balance, but you just have to have very clear what's your purpose. So in our terms, it was to try to deliver the real Anne as she were in the times we are considering every time. So in 24, in 33, say the different years. And to do that, of course, we had to know something more about her life.
Yeah, Juliette, I think you had some comment about being an intermediary between translation and transcription.
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking about the fact that I don't consider that I've read the original of what Anne Lister wrote, because I'm not familiar with the code, and I haven't read much of the handwritten parts. I've only read transcriptions and worked from transcriptions. So I think when you if you want to be specific, what's the original? Is it simply the English, or is it the code and the handwritten versions? Because with the transcripted parts, there's an intermediary. And I've read somewhere that Helena Whitbread said that the code breaker has, what is it? They have, I don't know, with some power, they have to determine where words begin and end and where sentences begin and end, because Anne didn't use blanks between words. And so you have some degree of interpretation. And it's the same thing for a translator. You have a degree of interpretation, but generally you don't work from something that's already been interpreted. So there's 2 layers of interpretations. There's 2 intermediaries or more, because there can be many transcribers. And so, yeah, I had to keep that in mind. And I think my main takeaway was that you have to accept that there can be mistakes, and it's inevitable, and it's okay, and you just do your best. And my main thing was I tried to be as, I doubted my understanding of what was written on the page. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't understanding it from the perspective of someone from the 21st century. So I always, when I stumble upon an expression, I always try to back up my understanding to make sure that I wasn't going to mistranslate something because I misunderstood it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, what do you think about in terms of like who is your audience when you're translating? What are your thoughts there?
Well, oh my God, the dog of my aunt is just barking here because she's really happy. But well, I think that Brazilian audience is really emotional, and they are really focusing in the romance of the show. So I have to show them that the things are different in the diaries, because that there's the whole thing of the romance, and they expect that Lister can be that really romantic person, that she will be having sex every day and things like that. And I had to show them that it's not much like that. I mean, she expressed it in her words a little bit different, and there's the whole romance of the show, because as a writer, I am a writer too, and I'm an artist. I know that the creativity and freedom has to be used, but when you're translating, you have to be wise about that. And I try to find the terms that they can have a conversation with the modern terms, because of the Portuguese can't translate some phrases that she said at the time, or some expressions. And I try to find this balance too, because of that, because I want people to understand what she's talking about, but still want people see that she's not always like that, like in the show, because they are focusing in that. And our audience, or most of them, are younger people that watch the show, and they want to see what she was doing at that time, if it was the same thing. And it's not always like that, but I try to bring some fun things for them to do. So I wrote the quiz in our Instagram to people to read our translation, and then they can interact with the games. And then I make a lot of tweets talking about some moments, or threads, so people can find that attractive enough, because not because the enlisters' eyes aren't attractive, but because of the Brazilian younger audience is really emotional. They really want the the hot thing that is not always there. So I try to bring like this. But yes, it's fun, and it's really interesting to see the both visions of Alistair and Walker, because I think I become even more in love with Anne Walker, knowing her way of looking at the world. I think this completely different from Alistair's diary sometimes, because it's her faults, you know.
Yeah.
And exactly, and she's so smart, and she's also really passionate about architecture, about arts and maths and studying. She loves studying. I think that she doesn't write much, but when she's talking about uh, arts, or I want to learn this thing, I want to draw, I want to buy this thing for some people, so you see that she really cares about the people around of her. And yes, it's awesome.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to transition to questions from our audience here. We have a few and we're probably not going to be able to cover them. So I'm going to suggest that we bring these questions and maybe we can sidebar them later and then also answer them, because I know this is a topic that everyone is super interested about. But let's dig into some of this. Let's see. Do you know if there's a question, general question. Do you know if there's anyone working on translations that are not categorized as Romance languages? Is anyone aware? Anybody, like even if it's not on the panel? Please drop in chat if you're aware of anything, and then we can invite them to join this conversation further. How do you show the abbreviation and unique terms in the transcripts in your own language? Do you also abbreviate, or do you like just identify an equivalent term?
I personally don't use abbreviations because it's just and uses them a lot, but we are not leaving the same in the same layout as the journals. I mean, we are transcribing. We're working on transcriptions, on the transcripts, and so I just translate the whole word.
Let's see, I'm scanning some of the questions.
If I got the right question.
Yeah.
When I started to translate the comparing the ends, I was doing it every day, like they appearing with a new one, and I had to translate like every day. I was doing that every day, and sometimes I wanted to do this really fast, and sometimes I try to translate in, and when I don't have time, I let in the same way that she wrote. But now I'm doing it slower because I want to find my balance too, like Lucia does. And I think it will be more accurate with time. And I think that is a good idea. I think I will try to do this to not do just the abbreviation. I can try to translate the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yannick is asking, I always feel that when translating, your abilities of your own language are even far more important than the language you're translating from. Do you agree? And any thoughts on that? Juliette?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think there's I wouldn't call it unspoken. It's pretty well known. I feel in the community of professional translators, you are only, what is it? I don't know, you're only supposed to translate from one language to your native language. Otherwise, it's not considered particularly, I don't know, accurate, professional, something like that. So yeah, I think that's because you can only express the ideas well enough if it's in a language that you really master.
Yeah. I have a question, because do you feel that sometimes she writes about a feeling that you think like, I can't translate it properly for my language, but I've tried to do my best to make it the fairest possible that I can, because sometimes I feel like that, like she's talking about that, but I can't express it enough because I don't have the right words for that.
Yeah, I suppose I mostly felt that way because I feel because of the time, not time difference, but the the difference in era, I felt like the way she expressed her sadness was very different from how we say it these days.
Yeah, that's a good point also, because certain languages are more emotive than others. Some are more like dry, and that, you know, will change the kind of way you're perceiving the text. I think we talked about an example of Anne had a draft of her letter to study in Paris, and she is, you know, asking to be a student, and she, you know, is practicing in English so that she can then translate and send the letter in French. And so she's like very matter of fact. And then when you compare that to the actual letter, it's so much more emotive in French, so much more expressive. You can really like hear her passion when she's describing her desire for learning and all that. And it's just so interesting, even just comparing her own translation of her own thoughts and feelings, how just the transition to another language just feels very different, which I think is a kind of a fun example. Let's see. Lucia, how skilled was Anne in speaking Italian or writing in Italian?
Now, I knew this question would arise. So we prepared an example of Anne's Italian skills, and there's a slide. Right. And well, first of all, we must say that Anne started studying Italian. She writes about studying Italian in the 20s, around 1820. We already find some hints about her searching for books of Italian grammars and so forth. But she started actually studying with Madame Galvani in Paris in 1824, and then went on and off. But she constantly went on collecting books and grammars and so forth. We have tracked some examples of her writing in Italian. Curious thing is, in 1836, we read that Anne taught Anne Walker a little bit of Italian, and so you'd say she was skilled. But then in 1838, they were in Spain traveling together, and they were on a boat trying to reach San Sebastian. Sorry for my pronunciation. Spanish is not my language. And Anne Walker took Anne's hand. She was fearing falling in the water or so, and she was frightened. And so Anne pointed to Fort Socoa to land. And she addressed the boatman with this sentence: with timore ella morire, io pagare intrate, which in English might sound a bit like fear she to die, with the infinite verb, I to pay, enter. So she wouldn't conjugate verbs. She would just use the infinite form. And so I would say her Italian, given this example, would be, she would have described it tolerable, maybe. Barely tolerable. I mean, given she had been studying so for so many years. And another example we have found, and it's a sort of one of her side notes she sometimes wrote in the journals, is the chi va piano va sano and chi va sano va lontano. It's a proverb, and it's the Italian equivalent of slow and steady wins the race, basically. So it's interesting how she here and there puts these Italian quotes. Also, in the previous years, we have found some things she likely copied from books, some quotes she transcribed from books. So I think she could have been better. So I don't know how she handled the other languages. Maybe French, surely better, because she lived there. So not sure about German, because she was dosing a lot on her German. Even when she was in Denmark. Yeah, it was, she could have been better, I think.
That's great.
I always, my opinion.
Yeah, I always wonder about her ability to actually say anything in Greek, because while she uses it more than other languages, I don't know that she was ever exposed to a Greek speaker on a regular basis that, you know, would make her intelligible. So that would be a curious question to ask. Let's see, I'm scanning some questions. So maybe a wrap-up question here is, how does the end lister you've come to know and align with, how is that different from the end lister that you first encounter or is shown in media? And how do you see that comparison? Chris, do you want to go first?
I think that it's always kind of shocking because you see that the things are a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of different, but I always talk to Marlene about how we see Lister through how we are studying her, and she becomes even more fascinating. Even that sometimes that she does things that I don't expect that she does, but I think that it's amazing. And when you see her comparing with how Anne Walker sees her too, it's really, really more interesting because you see how both sides are working. And I see how they work together because the way that Anne Walker's interesting in her life. I do understand now because Anne Lister wanted to be with her, because she wasn't like that. For example, I love Helena with Brett's books, but Helena with Brett always kind of ignored Anne Walker, not in a bad way saying that, but she didn't want to write about her. But I think when I saw Anne Walker interacting with Anne Lister, I can understand sometimes how to translate her things too, because sometimes she's talking about a subject that when I tried to translate Anne first, I was like, I can't figure it out what she's talking about. And then Anne Walker is talking about the same situation, so I can't translate it better. And another thing that I didn't talk about here, but maybe I put in the slides, is the fact that Anne Walker sometimes she doesn't write the subject of the phrases. So sometimes I don't know if she's talking about herself, or if she's talking about we, or if she's talking about they, because she doesn't write it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's great. Juliette, how has your perception of Anne Lister been affected by your translation effort?
Well, so I came to the diaries from Gentleman Jack, like a lot of us did. And first of all, I was surprised that there were diaries and that they were so voluminous. And then I was surprised by how accurate I thought her character was in the show, because as I read the diaries, I felt like I deepened my understanding of her as a person, and I realized how manipulative she was, how calculating, how snobbish, but also how charming. And I think it's all portrayed in Gentleman Jack. And I'm really glad that Sally Wainwright wrote her character this way, because her flaws are very visible. They're dwelled upon just enough to make her feel like a real person, which she was a real person. And I think with age, I've come to appreciate flawed characters in fiction a lot more, which also translates to the real world. You know, we're surrounded by people who are flawed, and we're flawed ourselves. And I think, yeah, it makes you feel closer to the character and the person of Anne Lister, because she's not idealized. And I think that's really great. So that's for the show. And I think the place where I was a little let down was there are a lot of articles from, I don't know, mainstream media calling her the first modern lesbian. and there's this tendency to call people the first of doing whatever. So of course she's one of the first documented lesbians, but she wasn't the first, and there's so much more to her, and I feel like it's not necessarily the best way to describe her. She was not one of the first, and even as you read her diaries, there are other lesbians in the diary, so she wasn't the first, and I think it's a reductive way of talking about her, and focusing on her being the first is not the most interesting. She was a lesbian at that time. I think that's what's the most interesting part.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucia, final word. Where do you see the difference?
Well, the point is that, of course, I met Anne through Gentleman Jack as well, but I quite soon left the TV character because I dived upon in the transcript, and well, lucky enough, I met some people who shared their transcripts with me, like Francesca and Adeline Lim, and then I went on that path and soon left the mainstream image. But I agree with Juliette, and my point is usually to start from to look for the common ground. So I started from there, from the parts from the humanity that was shown in the TV show. That was Anne's vulnerability. That was something that really attracted me in this search. The deep humanity that was coming from details, and that in that sense, amongst the many, Sally Wainwright has been just great, because the more I read the journals, and the more I found that, but that's the end I have in my heart in this sense. So anyone can find their the thing they have a soft spot for in the color, in the many shades.
Everyone can find their own Anne Lister, so that is fantastic.
In a way, of course, the aim is to try to consider her as a whole person, but we can analyze her, and it's sometimes you just end up doing it. It's
yeah. Thank you all so much. This has been fantastic. We can obviously talk about this a lot more, and we will invite Chris to share her slides at a later break. But next up, let's transition to vocabularizing and talk about Anne's weird language. See you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.